Uh-oh. Okay. I didn't lose you guys, right?
No, it's all good. Just put up the screen.
Great.
Sorry, looking for the button again.
It's up here at the top. Not press it. Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a moment. Thank you for joining us for Back to School. What will K through 12 look like in September? A big question. We'll get started with the webinar in just a moment. We'll let everyone join in here. Thank you again for joining us. My name is Garrett Sheehan. I'm President and CEO of the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce and Quinnipiac Chamber of Commerce. We're thankful to have you here with us this morning for this important webinar, Back to School. What will K through 12 look like in September? We have a great lineup of panelists here to help us discuss that question and really what education is going to look like as we head into the fall here. Before we get started, we want to thank all of our sponsors who help us put this programming on. UI, Connecticut Natural Gas, and Southern Connecticut Gas, who have sponsored so many of our programs, as well as our annual investors as well, who support all of our programming throughout the year. And also we have our streaming partners, several other chambers across the region who allow us to share the content that we provide here out of Greater New Haven Chamber and bring that to their chamber members as well. Our premier investors, these are our major investors that have allowed us to continue operations here at the chamber as we've gone throughout the pandemic, and all of our other investors across the board. We appreciate all of their support from the business community through this difficult time as we've continued on. We also want to thank our sponsor for this specific event, Strategic Spaces. We have Wayne LaSalle, who's on the line with us, and we'll introduce Wayne. He'll help me moderate in just a few moments. KI, Furniture Products, and then also Antonazi Associates. We have Patty McKeon and Michael Lasasso also with us, and we'll hear from them in just a few moments. So much of what we've been talking about in the schools is how we set up the space. So we'll definitely make sure we have a conversation about that, and also the plans just in general. I'm going to read off the list of all of our participants. You can see them here. We've got Wayne LaSalle, again, Managing Director at Strategic Spaces, Michael and Patty with Antonazi Associates, John Lodano, and we'll get to John in just a moment, with the Quinnipiac Valley Health District, Sal Menzo, he's the Superintendent for Wallingford Public Schools. If you've been with us with Quinnipiac Chamber, you've seen Sal. Michael Pinto should be joining us. He's the Chief Operating Officer for New Haven Public Schools. Kevin Smith, Superintendent for Wilson Public Schools, and Chris Soto, Director of Innovation and Partnerships with the State Department of Education. John, let me start off with you. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about what our understanding is on the health issues with children. It's obviously a developing field, and not everyone, even in the science community, we're still not certain of where things are with children and the virus, but we have some understanding. And maybe you can share with us, from your position in the Quinnipiac Valley Health District, what our understanding is.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I'm John Lodano. I'm a registered sanitarian at the Quinnipiac Valley Health District. We represent Hamden, North Haven, Woodbridge, and Bethany. And our group here has been working with all the school systems on this topic for a number of weeks now. I'm sure we've got a few more weeks to go. We know that the children are less likely to have severe symptoms from the disease. I'm not the expert on this. I'm talking from the sanitarian standpoint. Our role is to be into the school systems with the groups that are leading the schools, offering guidance, offering opinions. But it's really each school system that has control over how they will operate when the school comes back into session. We have lots of thoughts about how things should go, and one of the biggest concerns that most of everybody has heard already is about the masks. We have long discussions about the type and style and what's best and what's least best. From our standpoint, a mask is better than no mask, certainly. And whether or not you've got a very expensive mask, whether you've got a multi-layer mask, it's not the critical item. The critical item is that somebody is wearing a mask. Now, some of the they call them neck gaiters or the t-shirts, those are not very effective items and should have better masks. As far as I know, all of the school systems will be providing masks in some order of magnitude. Some school systems have agreed to provide all of the masks. Some have agreed to provide limited numbers of masks. It's partly about cost. We are also involved with the school systems in advising and guiding and trying to understand how the classrooms are going to be set up and whether or not the 3 to 6 foot distances can be maintained, and certainly whether or not the large distances can be maintained in the band rooms and in the chorus rooms. I've not seen any band or chorus plans yet that are actually viable, and I hear that some schools have actually canceled band and chorus for the foreseeable future because of these problems. I'm happy to go on with more if you like. I don't know how you want to do this, Garrett.
Yeah, no, we'll come back to you in just a moment, John. Okay. Let me turn now to Chris Soto with the Department of Education. And Chris, obviously, school districts have to make their own decisions, but with guidance from the state. I know the state has given a lot of thought to how this is planned out. Can you let us know where the state is? What are the requirements right now for all of the school districts as they make their own plans?
Great. Thanks, Garrett, for having me, and to everybody else that's on the call today. So we've gone through a, pretty deliberate process to get to where we're at. Just to give some people some history, the governor had, indicated his intentions to get students back in with all students based on the health indicators, right? We know that health and safety were going to drive this process, and what we heard through the process in the meantime was that students missed school. So that was, if people are curious on why there was that initial push to do that, that's basically what was driving the process. Knowing that we had good health indicators, kind of the envy of the country, but then also understanding the social emotional impact of students that are not in school. The idea here is that if Connecticut can't do it, then probably no state in the country could do it. Obviously, there were challenges, cohorting, as John kind of talked about in terms of spacing. The other big issue that came up was parents opting in or out. So what does that mean? This is the first time, kind of unprecedented, that we essentially committed to allow parents to basically leave their children home, not being homeschooled, but then also get that education from their school district. So this is a full remote option that school districts had to basically commit to. That's nothing that we've ever done in the state, and it required a lot of changes. Obviously, there were staff and student health concerns, understanding the data, understanding the research on how children transmit this disease. And obviously, the number one constant in this is flexibility, and we're constantly learning about this virus as we go on. And so that brought us to basically the process. And the process was we asked school districts to basically let us know what they plan to do. Whether that was number one, they had to submit a plan. And that was a plan that had 3 alternatives: a full remote, a hybrid version, and full in school. Once school districts knew that, we asked them for a survey on how many families they thought were going to basically come back into school, how many staff were going to come back into school. And once we had that data, that's when the state was basically able to commit to funds for PPE specifically. And then lastly, now that we know how many school districts are coming in person and their families are going to do hybrid, that's basically where we're at now. So school districts, we know roughly more than half of school districts have committed to a full in-person. It's almost about 60%, give or take, and that number is constantly fluctuating. And with the caveat, there might be some school districts that start, let's say in a hybrid or remote, or let's say a hybrid version at the very start before they ramp up to full in-person. But again, that number is about just under 60%. We know just the remaining are planning for a hybrid. Also remember that there are some variations in there where some districts might have a full in-person for elementary, but they might have a hybrid for high school because the cohorting is harder at the high school level. And then lastly, there's only 1 or 2 districts that are requesting a full remote because of some of the challenges. So that's kind of where we're at. That gives an overview. I'm happy to answer more questions. And turn it back to you, Garrett.
Great, thanks, Chris, and we'll come back to you in just a moment. So we're really honored to have a couple of school superintendents, and then also Michael Pinto with New Haven Public Schools, who's the Chief Operating Officer, and really appreciative because I know things are so busy right now just to try to get school up and running. We just heard from Chris all the different options that were out there, and then it came down to each school district to make decisions that made sense for them. So I know each school district has had to go slightly different, varying ways. If you look across the board, maybe not too many of them all look exactly the same, but it's what works for them. So Dr. Sal Menzo with Wallingford Public Schools. Sal, I'll start with you. And my understanding is you're looking at hybrid for part of the school system and full for another portion of the school system as we get started.
That is correct. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today. It has been a challenging time. I think that for everybody, when talking with parents and trying to explain why the rationale we chose to go forward with for our plan was what we did, it's not easy. And I think that, unfortunately, communication sometimes becomes challenging during pandemics. And I think communication has been a challenge and has been a stumbling block for us, not in Wallingford, but just statewide. And I think that's been a challenge. And I know we've been trying to work regionally with school districts to come up with the same plan, and it just doesn't work, as you said. So our plan right now is to have our K-5, pre-K-5 students in 5 days a week, full time. We did multiple surveys to identify how many students will be doing distance learning from home. And we believe that based on that number, we could socially distance the students appropriately in the classroom, because classroom sizes will be reduced between students who are going to be distance learning and also homeschooled. The middle school and high school presented different challenges. I think once the clarification of, I guess, a misunderstanding on the part of superintendents was determined, that we thought we were all going to have to go back full time. That was being driven home to all of us. So once that was clarified, then there was a little bit of opportunity to look at our middle school and high school differently. I think that our middle school and high school present different challenges because of this size. So our middle school classrooms are only about 530 square feet, and they're bigger bodies, and that's a challenge. Our high school students, to keep them in similar groups, they change classes. They're multi-grades. There's freshmen with sophomores, there's sophomores with juniors, juniors with seniors. So that presented a challenge. So we decided, and we kicked around a lot of different opportunities. In our initial plan, we had done the 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days back on. But we realized that educationally was not going to be what was going to best meet the needs of Wallingford students. Based on data that we had collected from our parents in the spring about virtual learning, they wanted their students to have contact with the teacher every day. They wanted either physical or virtual contact on a daily basis, because they felt that, sometimes students could be potentially teaching themselves, and that's not what teachers want. Teachers go into teaching because they want to teach the kids that they have in front of them, and we weren't giving the teachers that opportunity. So we actually revisited our hybrid model, and we came up with a different model, a little unique. So what we're doing is that the middle school students and high school for social distancing, they'll go 2 days live in person with the teacher, but they will get out 3 hours early on those days. In the afternoon, when those students are traveling home, the students who weren't in school that day will have the class taught to them by the teacher virtually. The next 2 days after Monday and Tuesday, the students who were not in school will then come to school and be in person. And then the students who were in school the first 2 days will have virtual learning in the afternoon. So what this solved for us was our number one problem, is that it gives every child contact with his or her teacher, either in the classroom or virtually every single day. There was a concern about the 2 days on and 3 days off model too, because curriculum has to be taught. And in some instances that might make the curriculum truncated. And if you have AP classes or ECE classes for UConn credit, there was a concern by the teachers that they couldn't cover all the curriculum. So we tried to address that. We also felt socially that we needed to get our students in school as often as possible. And we also need to make them have that connection with their teachers. The other value added part of our model for us, and again, it has to be based on where you are as a community, was that we have a lot of students who did opt for virtual learning. And we would have had to provide them a different set of teachers rather than the teachers that they would have when they come back to school. So this opportunity allows our students in the afternoon that would be taking the course, that because they weren't in school that morning, to also join the students who were virtually learning, so that they're part of that team at the middle school, or they're part of that Algebra 2 class at the high school. So whenever they decide to come back to school, they can just make that seamless reentry, which is so key. So I know it's a little bit complicated. We are working with the YMCA and Boys and Girls Club to offer after-school programming to address some daycare concerns. We don't traditionally offer programming at our middle school level, so this will be a new venture. The public school district will be the lead in the program through the Office of Early Childhood, and then the two partners organizations will take over each middle school. The high school, again, will move forward as planned. Our survey results, our parents have been extremely responsive, which is awesome. I think that they're frustrated. And I told them, at our board meeting last week, if you watched it, I said, you're probably throwing things at the screen right now at me because you're not happy, but I'm not going to make everybody happy. And I think that's the challenge. And I think the State Department has done a good job of trying to help us communicate that. But it's not perfect, but I'm excited because I do believe in our plan. I do believe that we're going to be meeting students socially, emotionally, as well as academically. And I think that, and obviously safety. So we'll continue to challenge ourselves. We have some challenges as we move forward, but we have 8 days of professional development with the teachers. We were ahead of the curve. We actually extended our professional development for teachers in collaboration with the union back in June, prior to the July declaration by the State Board of Education that we should do that. So we were already ahead of that because we knew there was no way 3 days was going to cover everything we need to do in a pandemic.
Right.
So I'll pause there, but that's just a little bit about some of the things that we're trying to accomplish in Wallingford.
Thanks, Al. Let me turn to Michael Pinto, and Michael, in the city of New Haven, just as Al was saying, very different situations for every town and city, and obviously an urban setting provides its own unique challenges in educating students. I also know that right now New Haven, I believe, is petitioning to start all online, and there have been, I know the mayor has been interested in going to a hybrid model, so still discussions around that.
Yeah, we initially the superintendent had recommended a hybrid model, and that was supported by the mayor and our staff, and we had developed the hybrid model, looking at what effectively was an AABB day approach. Some of the younger grades were going to be in 4 days a week. The middle schools would be on the 2 days a week, and then 3 days of remote learning, and then we have 10 high schools, including the magnet high schools, and most of the high schools are somewhat smaller. Obviously, the two comprehensive high schools, Wilbur Cross and Hill House, presented their own challenges because they're so large, as well as Career High School, also fairly large, working on a hybrid model for that. The Board of Education itself actually voted that they wanted an all remote option, or they wanted to pursue and request that the superintendent request a waiver for the all remote option from the state, which is actually going to be heard today, I believe, at 1:30. So the meeting for that and the hearing for that is at 1:30 this afternoon. So part of it is we will know more now. The all remote option or the all remote request would be for that the Board of Education has requested is for 10 weeks, effectively the first marking period, so that we can evaluate where we stand. Again, we will see in a few hours as to where that stands and what, which direction we're going. The sort of operational planning and the academic planning have proceeded because we do, whichever option we are going with, there is going to be a remote element. So we've been sort of working on two parallel tracks. On our operations side, making sure that we're ready to go if on September 3rd when schools are set to open, whether we need, for transportation and meals service and all of the other ancillary and support functions that go along with operating a school system and a school district, as well as on the academic side, making sure that we have both the in-class and synchronous learning for remote and asynchronous learning. So there will be some combination of live and or a combination of live and pre-recorded or remote, non-live remote work as well. But right now we're in that holding pattern until until the superintendent and the assistant superintendents have the meeting and the board members have the meeting with the state in a couple of hours.
I'll turn to Kevin in just a moment, but Michael, as far as connectivity, students, I know a lot of work was done in the spring getting Chromebooks and other laptops out to students, but there's also obviously the issue of Wi-Fi connections. Where do you feel like things stand for the population of students going into school start?
We are we did receive we received a donation from the Dalio Foundation for laptops that will effectively provide a one-to-one laptop, Dell laptops for all high school students. And we have worked very diligently to acquire a one-to-one capability for all of our students, effectively from like 3 through 8. We have acquired both what we had on hand and the orders that we placed. We will have sufficient Chromebooks for all of those students, and the additional, we've also worked to acquire for like the pre-K through 2. We're working on acquiring tablets and iPad type devices to aid, because they're, the younger kids simply don't necessarily work as well on a keyboard, but on a touch screen can do can do some of the distance learning that's necessary. The connectivity issue has been a huge issue. Really, let's put it this way. Let me go back 6 months or back January. We were really looking at, we had made the decision that we needed to get to a one-to-one capability. The COVID crisis and some of the funding and donations that have come in with it have sped that process up. I really anticipated it would take us at least a year, if not a year and a half, to get to a one-to-one capability, just given the limitations of funding. Fortunately, some of the CARES Act money and the Dalio donations have sped that process up. The next, the other parallel hurdle that we've been working with is the connectivity issue. Initial surveys said that something like 90% of our students had access to the internet. But part of that is, do they have reliable Wi-Fi? Do they have real high-speed internet that you can actually do the streaming online learning that was necessary? We are in the process. We've been working the New Haven Public Schools and the City of New Haven have been working hand in hand with the cable providers and and also in our own project to provide effectively we've worked on a pilot program to effectively broadcast internet over the off of the buildings. We put the using our own connections and then putting Wi-Fi routers and transmitters on the outside of the buildings that we've been working on in the Fairhaven neighborhood and the Hill neighborhood. And that should be up and running in the next couple of weeks, and we'll have a better sense of how just how good our coverage is and how well that works going forward. And then obviously been working with donors and the city of New Haven to create at least, get the Internet Essentials package to all eligible kids in the district, so that when we do start online, that there will be the option that everyone will have, some reasonably reliable, or not reasonably, but they will have a reliable source of internet connection. The trick has been, in part, the sort of basic packages. When you get 2 or 3 kids online at a time, it starts to bog down. So we're working on making sure that we have adequate internet and Wi-Fi speeds to, the upload and download speeds to make sure that the kids can actually, that they're not effectively tripping each other up with multiple kids in the same household. We expect to be ready to go, but it will be a process, and over the course of the next several months and year, we'll be working with the city further to really create a full option for real high speed, full high speed on download speeds across the city. It's not just good for our kids. It's also an economic development issue for the city. I mean, making we as a city need to be more competitive for growth areas, medical, biomed and the tech sectors that are really the sort of meds and eds and tech sectors, which feed off of and make the city more attractive as an economic destination.
Yeah, it's obviously with every challenge we faced through the pandemic, we realize there's many sub-issues that have to be dealt with. Thanks, Michael. Let me bring in Kevin Smith with the Superintendent of Wilton Public Schools. And Kevin, thanks for joining us. My understanding is you also are going to a hybrid plan as well. Maybe just to change up the question a little bit, I'll ask you, of all the challenges you've faced in implementing this plan, what are the top ones that you've had to deal with?
My goodness.
So many, I'm sure.
There are just an incredible number of challenges. To put it simply, I'll just pick up on some of the themes that, Chris started with and Sal and Michael reiterated. But, it seems to me that this is not an overstatement that we're being asked to reinvent public education in a span of about 5 or 6 months here. And so thinking through first legitimately all of the dizzying number of logistics, just mechanically, how do you do that, and how do you respond to the environment that we're in, which enables kids to access education from home and in person simultaneously. And then you deal with the social and emotional trauma of this pervasive uncertainty. And so when those things come together, what you have is an environment where there's a lot of unknowns and people have very intense and diverse opinions about how things should be done. And so trying to maintain a sense of community and move an entire group of people in a single direction is probably the single greatest challenge given those environmental considerations.
And let me just let everyone on the line know, if you have questions, you can put those in the chat right now. I'm going to turn over to Wayne in just a moment, but we want to ask Chris and all of the superintendents this question. And Chris, I'll start with you. And we could do a webinar like this probably for 4 hours, as Kevin just alluded to. There's so many issues here. But taking aside whether it's virtual, online, hybrid, full in person, how are we going to get all kids to grade level 2021 in June when the school year ends? And are we thinking about things that are outside the box? Are we just still stuck in what our state rules are? How are all of you thinking about that? And Chris, I'll start with you on the state level.
Great. I think the one important thing to realize is that we had challenges before COVID, right? And so we understand that what we can't do, at the very least, is widen any gaps that existed. And so as we move forward, I think, what we're trying to do is ensure that whatever this school year looks like, it's very thoughtful. I want to give credit to the superintendents, teachers, and students who had, at the flip of a switch, had to basically go from what has been normal for years to something that was upside down, right? Shutting down schools, going full remote. It was something that nobody was prepared for. I think the difference here, and to answer your point of how we get to where we need to be on certain metrics and benchmarks, is ensuring that we have gone through a thoughtful process to give, districts, teachers, and students all the tools that they need in order to navigate whichever mode we're going to be in. Because the reality is, and I'll say it again, the only constant right here is flexibility. We know that the community spread indicators are going to largely determine what schools do. And that means whether or not they're starting hybrid and they go full, or if they have to move from hybrid to remote, and, going through these different levels. And so, what we're trying to do is put an a la carte, basically put the a la carte options out there for, whatever feedback that we're hearing that districts need and teachers need. And so, we have things like the CT Learning Hub. We just partnered with the Columbia School of Research to put out a model distance learning, remote learning framework. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do. So that way, if a district says we need help, we can point them to the resources that they need.
Thanks. Kevin, same question. How are you guys thinking about the end state, the end goal of what we're trying to accomplish here?
Yeah, great question, and probably the most important question. So our commitment, first and foremost, is that we provide the highest quality education to all of our kids wherever they are, in whatever environment they might be in. And so in order to accomplish that, that really led us to think about our model. And so while we ultimately elected to start the year in a hybrid model, we've also made a simultaneous commitment that those kids that are at home on those alternate days will have the access to the classroom. And so we've set up, through camera technology and sound fields and the like, the opportunity for those kids to participate remotely with the simultaneous live classroom instruction. And so we think kind of setting that paradigm up, doing some early diagnostics, and then really focusing on our intervention strategies over the kind of mid to late fall, early winter, will help us get a clear sense of where our kids are and what they need. But that is absolutely our first commitment.
Michael, we talked a lot about education gaps, and Chris mentioned not letting those gaps get further. But you're going to be the one on the ground, making sure that happens in New Haven, and you're trying to bridge those gaps as it is. So what are some of the things that you guys are thinking about right now?
Well, part of it is because we had such an initial tough outbreak. Obviously, Fairfield County got hit first, and then it came right up the I-95 corridor. The initial focus will be on sort of the social emotional health and sort of trauma-informed learning to make sure that our kids all can come back and are supported, or in whatever form we ultimately take, when we find out later this afternoon, but that we are actually supporting our kids and making sure that our kids are learning. And we've spent the last 5.5 months really working to ensure that and learning from the sort of missteps that we had. We did have a fair number of disengaged youth and disengaged students in the spring, and making sure we spent our community outreach and our community support team have been working all summer to make sure that those kids are engaged, and so that we don't have a further expansion of an achievement gap in New Haven. I mean, obviously although the city is about 40%, white, and roughly 36-38% African American, and 20% Latino, or 25% Latino, where the school system is only about 20% white, if that, and making sure that our students of color are supported and are achieving as well as the white students, and working to close that achievement gap, and that we don't, and obviously the first piece will be making sure that doesn't get expanded or worsened. Equity is supporting the students that need it, is something that we take very, very seriously in New Haven, and making sure that we're supporting the achievement of our students of color is of paramount importance.
Thanks, Michael. And Sal, with all of these changes and part of the class being online, I mean, is it even possible to get kids to the grade level where they would be in a normal school year? Are there things we should think about? I mean, should we think about the state expanding the number of days we go to school for this next year? I would imagine everything should be on the table as we enter into this new school year.
Correct. And I think you have to be very balanced in your approach, because there is an equilibrium that you have to establish. So you do want to make sure that you're dealing and addressing social and emotional needs of students. We already had, prior to the state's announcement this week about working with Yale, we had already signed up with another organization to, we've been working in our district now for about 6 years using a second step program, which is dealing with social and emotional development at all of our pre-K-5 schools. And we had workshops that are already planned for our teachers next week around that concept. In addition, we also are dealing with racism. We're working with another consultant, having our teachers and all of our staff, para-educators, playground facilitators, whomever it may be, really have a thoughtful conversation about the unintended racism that does occur, and the bias that does occur in our district. And then we already had planned to extend that to our students and our families. But when you get to the academics, that was so pivotal. And that's why we changed our plan, as I said earlier, about our hybrid model. We did not think that our hybrid model that we had initially proposed to the state was going to allow us to provide the educational opportunity with the level of rigor that we needed for our students, and the level of commitment that would be on the part of the student and the family as well as the teacher. So that need to have that daily interaction was essential. Also, the fact that every child will have both an in-person, the children who choose to go to school will have an in-person, but every child will have a virtual experience from day one. So if we have to pivot, as Chris said, and we have to pivot quickly to full distance learning, there's no setting up Google Classroom time lag. There's no teacher time lag on them not, having gotten the cobwebs off, dusted them off from using the technology in the spring. There's just a natural transition. And that was a real key point, because we pivoted very quickly. We closed on a Thursday. We reopened school on a Wednesday the following week. That was really quickly for us. And we were very supported by our teachers union and very supported by our paraeducators and our parents. But we don't want to even have that much of a lag this time around, and we don't want the hiccups. So that was why our model was so important. But it's also, as Kevin said, it's about assessing students as to where they are. We don't know what their loss of learning was. So we need to do the informal assessments. And that's why kindergarten or pre-K through 5 was so essential, to get them in 5 days a week in person, to be able to have those small group conversations, to do our assessments. But again, not start the first day with an assessment, because we need them socially to re-engage themselves and get re-inculcated into our learning community. But the fact was, we need to have some of that data in place so we can fill those gaps. We've already identified the fact that intervention and services, as Kevin said, our SRBI services may need to look differently this year. And we also need to not forget and lose sight of our special education population. Many of our special education students, we really need to reconnect with those families. We were very fortunate. We held an in-person special education summer school program this year. It was extremely successful. We had great attendance. We had great success with it. But we know that we need to continue to make sure that our students all have their individual education plans implemented with fidelity, And we need to make sure that continues. So the last part of it that also is very important is that we can't forget that the students come with families. So we're planning to start immediately workshops for families virtually on making sure they understand the technology. They understand the new landing page that we've provided students. We look to provide all of our pre-K2 students with iPads and all of our 3 through 12 students with Chromebooks. We did a 5-year, when Mike mentioned that New Haven was looking to go 1-to-1 in a matter of a year and a half, I was like, wow, that would have been nice. It took us 5 years. We don't have the same economic, financial funding mechanisms. And so it took us a little bit longer. But the good news is that we were there at the beginning of the crisis. So we were able to put out Chromebooks to over 4,000 students and to put out over 100 hotspots. So we're looking to continue that. But it's multi-pronged. It's really, as I said, an equilibrium that you have to balance in all the different buckets. But I think we do need to think creatively. I think it's not less time in school that we want. I think also with teacher evaluation, we need to look at that very creatively, because I know the state has given some guidance and flexibilities, but we can't lose sight that academic goals should not be on the bottom of the list. Those should also be in the middle of the list. And so I think that we need to be very thoughtful in our process, because we do have a responsibility to have these students be at grade level. Otherwise, the future of the system is going to be somewhat compromised.
Thanks, Sal. Let me bring in now Wayne LaSalle, and I've mentioned Wayne. Wayne is with Strategic Spaces here in Connecticut. And Wayne, why don't you lead a little bit of a conversation about physical space, because as we've heard in almost all of these plans, students are going to be in the classroom, and that obviously is going to present challenges.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for participating. It's unbelievable hearing what you guys are all doing. You know, as a parent, this information is fantastic. I've got a 7th grader and a sophomore in high school, and to hear that these things are you know, the plans that are being put in place are awesome. So yeah, so in working with Patty and Michael a while back, we wanted to kind of bring her in around the discussion around, you know, opening a safe school and what that looks like from a facility standpoint. And I guess the first question that I would have, and I'm not sure who wants to answer it, is, you know, getting the children to the school system, the busing, how is that going to work, and what does that look like? Anybody want to take that first?
I can tell you what I've heard from the school systems in our area.
Okay, go ahead, John.
The plan is to use the buses as typical. The big concern that comes up is in relation to cohorting within the school compared to non-cohorting in the buses.
Okay.
And there's not a clear answer yet about how the buses are going to be cleaned in between schools, in between morning and afternoon, or from one end of the week to the next. And that's as yet to be resolved. I think that there's got to be a bigger discussion very quickly about that. I also know there's a lot of encouragement to have moms and dads drive their children to school. And that presents a traffic and driveway problem in many of the schools in our area. Some have also suggested it presents a condition where we're going to need police to guide traffic. So I'm hoping that there are lots of conversations planned on this in other areas. I know there are here.
I know in Wallingford, we started our conversations with our bus companies back in April when we established our COVID recovery teams the first week of April. So we have 9 teams that have been working since that time. And basically our bus companies have been very collaborative. So we do have a cleaning schedule that we've communicated to our families. It's multiple times throughout the day. We also have hired bus monitors. It was a recommendation. It wasn't a requirement, but we did hire bus monitors for all of our buses that will be taking note of seating charts, because we do have to worry about contact tracing on the buses, who sat next to whom each day. We also have the masks available for the buses. What we did is, as I mentioned earlier, we did a couple of surveys as to who's coming back, who's not coming back. Part of those surveys was who is driving their students rather than having their students take the bus. As a result, there has been a natural attrition and somewhat mitigation of the numbers on our buses. So we continue to look at those numbers. We've cross-referenced them. Are the buses going to be at a low capacity rate? Absolutely not. Nor does the state plan require them. That's the challenge. I think that the challenge that we face is that in the initial state plan, The lowest level was all students in person, buses at full capacity. Then there was a shift where we could do hybrid, but hybrid really doesn't come until we're at a moderate level of COVID in the state. If you look at it, and I was on the 8 o'clock Department of Public Health phone call, been doing that for the last 3 weeks. Again, that's the moderate level. With that came reduction of students on a bus. So we have 1 foot in one world, 1 foot in the other world. And so we're sticking with the fact that, again, Connecticut is still in the yellow zone. New Haven County is still in the yellow zone. Wallingford, Connecticut is actually in the green zone. We have 0.42 cases over a 7-day rolling cycle. So we do not feel that we need to go to the deeper mitigation issues. And the big elephant in the room, and I'm sure Kevin and Mike could attest to this, is that even if we wanted to double our bus capacity, even if we had all the money in the world, there was the goose that laid 5,000 million golden eggs, in the state of Connecticut that we could all cash in, there would never be enough bus drivers. Let's just think about that. There would never be enough bus drivers. We all have a difficult enough time to get our 58 buses. We have 58 buses we run every year in Wallingford. We have a hard enough time getting those 58 drivers, never mind another 58 bus drivers. So again, it's not a good answer. It's not, we've been very transparent with our community, but we've also been very, very collaborative with our companies. We're very fortunate. We have great relationships with all of our service providers, as I'm sure Kevin and Mike do in their districts, and all superintendents have to. But we are doing the best. I think parents have, the many I've spoken to personally, have realized, okay, they are doing the best they can. And I do agree, as John just said, the traffic issues at the schools, we're already working, like every other district, working with their traffic cops, the police officers, to discuss with them how we're going to manage that. And I think, again, the parents understand that, but it's not an easy one. And then it's really about the cohorting or the grouping, because that's a different family, as we're calling it in Wallingford, than the one they're going to go into in their classroom. So I'm sure Kevin and Mike probably have experienced similar, if not even more challenging situations.
Very similar. I think, as Chris started the call with the word flexibility, we're all tasked with coming at each of these issues and concerns in as flexible a way as possible. And, I think we'd also agree that every decision has benefits and drawbacks. And so, for years and years, we were encouraging our families to access our public busing. And so this year we're saying, no, go ahead and feel free to drive your kids to school. And so here in Wilton, the majority of families have elected or indicated that they would drive their families to and from school. So similar to Sal's point, we're seeing significantly reduced ridership on the bus. And that will create, other concerns. 3 of our 4 schools here in Wilton are on a single campus. So at the start of school and at the end of school, traffic on the main thoroughfare gets backed up. And so we're imagining that, the time amount will at least double, even if we're in a hybrid, getting people kind of through the schools and back home again. And so, going to the point about flexibility, we're asking people to understand that and to be patient and to recognize that, everything is a process, and we'll probably tweak and modify as we learn some new things. But, people just need to breathe deeply and recognize that we're trying to get kids in school and do what we're built to do.
So that brings up a good point, Kevin. So you've got traffic patterns, you've got schools coming in. How does that affect the start of schools? Is that going to affect timing wise? Are you going to start at different times, even at the hybrid level where you've got A's and B level? How does that affect timing?
Yeah, we've kept our start and end times the same, but within that, we've built in a staggered arrival, staggered dismissal. And it's not substantial for us. We're talking maybe an additional 8 or 10 minutes. But the compromise there, of course, is that's 8 or 10 minutes that otherwise would have been dedicated to instructional time or, some other use. So it's a trade-off. And then we have to, we've got a plan, and then, the kids will be back on the 31st, and then we'll find out whether the plan was any good.
Our situation, obviously, for a large urban district, we have 300 buses, and pointing out, or just echoing what Sal said, even if we had all the money in the world, wouldn't matter. We wouldn't be able to staff, even if the first student could probably acquire the buses, but they would just sit there because there's not enough drivers to drive them. In our surveys, it does look like we'll have that the call and encouragement for folks to bring their kids to school or, encourage walkers has been reasonably successful. We anticipate, a fairly significant decompression of the buses, about 50%. And I mean, the recommendations or the requirements for summer school, we simply had to not provide, we simply canceled summer school this year because we just couldn't, at the time, we simply couldn't meet the social distancing requirements and the busing requirements. At 25% capacity, there was simply no way we could do it efficiently or effectively, and let alone in any cost-effective manner. Hopefully, the number of kids who have elected the remote option, whether or not we move forward with the hybrid option, and the folks the parents and families who are going to simply take their kids to school. I will continue to walk my daughter to school as I have since she started kindergarten. And if we go back on the hybrid model, and it looks like we're, we should be at about a half capacity, but really we probably won't know until the first day of school. We will, aggressively implement the loading from back to front. First kid on goes all the way to the back seat, and then the last kid on gets off first. And we will work with, at the school level, for dismissal, effectively, they'll have to sort of line kids up the same way, so that you have, kids not passing by each other. There is the concern of kids being kids, and being a little, rambunctious on the bus ride. Particularly some of ours are relatively long, we bus kids from Wallingford and from Ansonia for the magnet schools. It's going to be a challenge. I think in echoing what Sal and Kevin have said, we've got a plan. We think it's a good one, and but you don't know until all the plans go out the window effectively, and you have to revise them. When that first day of school, when that first soldier hits the beach, everything goes awry, and you have to adapt. And we think that our teachers and our administrators, because we have sort of worked on the schools are not autonomous, but the level of local control and because we have 42 schools, a fair amount of authority is devolved to the principals and to the teachers to be adaptive. And we think that our staff and our faculty will be able to communicate with me and with my staff, and we will all work together and work collaboratively and be as adaptive as we need to be to make sure that we can get kids to school. And my job is to get kids safely to school, to a safe building, feed them, a quality meal, and then get them home at the end of the day. Obviously the academic side is responsible for teaching them while they're there, but it's a Herculean task. But I think we have the flexibility, and we have the adaptability, and the wherewithal to get it done.
Awesome. So now that we've got the kids there, thank you guys for thinking about all that, good insight. Michael Lasasso, from an architecture standpoint and a building standpoint, what can the school districts do to prepare their air filtration system, their air handling system, and what does that look like?
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, that's the question, right? As I'm sitting here listening to the superintendent speak, I'm reflecting and really kind of awestruck at the primary, secondary, and tertiary planning that's been going on. And I echo Wayne, your comments about the relief that I have that these individuals are actively working, both the panelists that have joined us as well as the superintendents that we work with throughout the state. I find this particular scenario and a lot of the planning has been put in place without really knowing how it's going to be tested. And we see the same thing in the building environment as well. For decades, the way the funding is structured, for state projects, we're always trying to condense the square footage. And this pandemic has introduced the complete opposite regarding the way space should be utilized, at least from a health standpoint. I think what we're probably most interested in is looking at the sustainable activities that we can implement for the future. I think a lot of this, the activities that we're seeing put in place now will be tested over the next several months. What can be sustained thereafter is really what we're probably most interested in. There's immediate things that are obviously can be implemented, but it really is as far-ranging as something as simple as the utilization of drinking fountains are going to change entirely. Nowadays, we see a lot of bottle fillers, and perhaps that's a safer way of transferring water. There are more technological factors that we can implement, such as the implementation of UV light in ductwork to help reduce the presence of potential antigens in the air. And there's actually sort of historically simple things that could be implemented as well that we may be requested to incorporate in our schools. One of the things that I can think of from a not so recent past are products like linoleum is a good example. It has a natural antimicrobial aspect to it. And so the introduction of that versus perhaps a VCT or other type of flooring finish could be more widespread over the next several years. There are other products that are available that also can be manufactured with antimicrobial aspects. So it's really fascinating, and I appreciate all of the commentary from the panelists. I find it interesting, and I would love to see another hour's worth of information continue.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. Patty, quick question for you. You know, for years in designing, in school design is what you do. You know, you were bringing in, you know, smaller group sort of participation. How is it going to affect?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been practicing the 21st century learning environment for the past 20 years, myself specifically. And now we're telling everybody to stop all those things that we've been trained to, you know, implement in our school designs. And, you know, the children have to learn in isolation. They can't use those great maker spaces within the buildings. They can't use learning commons the way they used to. So we are telling teachers to teach differently and students to learn differently. And how that affects the space is dramatic. It could be, in some instances, depends on the percentage of students coming back to school. That's the magic number. If you have 100% of students coming back to school and you have a classroom that fits 30, you might be able to social distance that classroom between 12 and 16 students if you truly stick to the 6-foot rule. If you make it a little denser by a 3-foot rule, which some schools are using, you could get more, but you'll never get all 30. So you have to take those students and set them up in some of the ancillary spaces, like learning commons, the gymnasium, the cafeteria that might not be used now in the traditional sense. Some buildings don't have the space for that. So the thing that keeps me up at night right now is worrying about what that percentage of student body coming back to the school, and the principal of that school calling me and saying, Patty, help me with my layouts. And I'm trying to find ancillary space based on that percentage to give them a safe classroom environment. So I think that's the biggest challenge from how it affects the internal space from the designer's lens.
Excellent.
Wayne, can I weigh in a little bit?
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead, John.
I'd like to weigh in on the more immediate concerns about the indoor environment, and I'm really impressed with everybody and their involvement. One of the things that we get questioned on by lots of folks is whether or not buildings should have windows opened or closed. And clearly, air conditioning and air handling systems are designed to have the windows closed. And opening the windows is a big deal to some folks, and they think that it's the best thing that they can do. It's probably one of the least productive things you can do when you have a well air conditioned and well ventilated building. Couple that with the folks that want to arbitrarily change filters in the air handling systems. We have to caution folks sometimes that changing filters is really a detriment because it tends to burn out motors that can't handle finer filters. The indoor air environment to us here is a very, very big deal. And a lot of the school systems here have come long, long ways over the past 10 years to achieve that. And that's one of the bigger issues we have here immediately, is convincing people that the indoor environment is something that has to be addressed routinely.
Great. And Wayne, thanks for leading this part of the conversation. Wayne, maybe I'll just ask you briefly, and we'll get close to wrapping up. Anything on the furniture side? Obviously, I know that's an area where you focus on, and things that can be done to change the classroom.
I think, you know, in talking to a few people and looking at kind of what the classrooms look like, is, if you were able to create sort of a barrier or a screen between students so that you can condense the space from a 6 foot to maybe a 3 foot model, is something that a lot of schools are looking at trying to do. The other aspect that we're seeing is the ability to protect the teachers, right, with mobile screens in a way that they can actually speak to a student and feel comfortable in having that distance between the instruction going on at the front of the classroom and even talking to a student one-on-one where you have a divider in between. So we're looking at the ability to put in some mobile screens, some clear screens. Obviously there's a cost it's associated with that. Hopefully some of these screens can be used as double duties and turn into maybe a whiteboard or a writable surface in the future so that you can do instruction as you're going. But that's sort of the two things that we're seeing. There's not a lot of change to the furniture layouts. A lot of the school districts are saying, hey, we've got to utilize what we have, and that's what they're doing. The money that they have is going to the technology, it's going to the classroom remote learning sort of side of things. And they're doing a very good job of working with what they have and just adding on to it.
Great. Let me just close out. I'll ask each of our superintendents and Michael closing question, and Chris as well. And thank you everyone for being on this panel. As we said, I mean, we could have gone maybe we've gone 3 or 4 hours with the amount of content that's here. But things are constantly changing. I think that's the one thing we've learned throughout this pandemic. So I guess I'll start with you, Michael, and then go through Kevin, Sal, and Chris. Just any closing thoughts for parents, for businesses who are depending on their employees, trying to understand what their work schedules are going to be like for the year going forward.
I guess the request is is asking people to be patient. As I think as everybody, all of my colleagues have said, we've put as much planning as we possibly can at this point into going forward, and we're going to have to adapt as the situation on the ground changes, and that's going to take a lot of patience and a lot of which we're gonna maybe it's a new something that we need to relearn. That things aren't going to happen overnight, but we will adapt as quickly as we possibly can. I mean, obviously, we're all hopeful that that the transmission, community transmission stays low, and that we can gradually move more kids back to school on 5 days a week, so that will take some of the burden off of parents. How do you supervise kids? How do you supervise a third grader? If you're not able to be home, that's going to be really difficult. And again, my daughter is going into 7th grade this year. She could stay home. Granted, I also have the luxury, in a sense, that my mother-in-law lives with me. This is one of those times when you're like, okay, this is helpful. So there is, an adult at home, and my wife is also working at home. But it's but even when she goes back to work, there's still an adult at home. That's a luxury that most families don't have, where both parents work, and you have to adapt. So hopefully businesses will recognize that, that this is, going to take a toll on all of us, and we need to be as flexible as we possibly can. And we need to learn some patience on this, just because if we get it wrong, it's going to, we're going to be back in a situation where we were in March, and no one wants to go back there.
Thanks, Michael. And we'll be watching for that decision later today as well. Kevin?
Yeah, so I'll repeat what Mike just said about being patient, and then I would add to that, I would ask all of our families, community members, civic leaders, when you're looking at decisions schools are making, presume positive intent. People have been working tirelessly to get kids back in school. Teachers want to be with their kids. Administrators want schools open. We all want everybody to be safe. And so there are, a million logistics and a million decisions that aren't going to make everybody happy, as was said earlier in the call. And so people need to know that, all of this work comes with an incredible amount of goodwill and, trying to do the right thing behind it. And so we need everybody just to know that, we're in this for all of our students.
So great reminder. Sal?
Echo those two sentiments and add to it, be the person that you want your child to be in this process. So don't, as parents, I talk to them quite often that their emotions and their beliefs transfer to their children very quickly, and the anxiety grows in the child. And every year we have a student who gets, a parent who calls up and says that the bus was late and their child got off the bus bawling and crying. And my first question to the parent will be, well, were you crying first? Did they see you crying, or were they crying and then you cried? And in 9 out of 10 times, the parent will say, I was crying. And I said, well, do you think your child fed their fear off of you? And they'll say, yeah. And I think that's what we're dealing with. There is some fear because a lot of our parents in Wallingford, I know the chamber knows our connection with businesses. We have a good feeling and we have an understanding of how many parents were working from home. So they're now also going to be transferring back to the workforce and back to their environment. So I think there's fear on the part of the adult going back to work, and then also now the fear for their child going back to school. So we really do need to support both, but just giving them the ability to say, okay, I want my child to be the person that I am. And we actually, going back to the businesses, now that we have our plan in place, we're going to re-engage our business think tank. We're going to be having a meeting in the next week to really kind of talk to the businesses. Okay, now that you know this, we know who works in your businesses. How can we further support you? Because we can't have our businesses leaving Wallingford. We can't have them leave Connecticut. And we know that workforce is still an issue. We're going to start our 5th pipeline, but it's going to be all virtual this fall. So the thing is, we know we have a commitment to our businesses, and we have a commitment not just for their sustainability, but also for their employees. So we're going to continue to do that. And we're very supported by our businesses and our community and our public officials.
Thanks a lot, Sal. And Chris, we'll close out with you. I know the state, the governor has been, he talks about this issue every day, I think, right now at this time. From a state standpoint, what are some of your closing thoughts?
Yeah, well, it was great to hear some of the previous speakers' thoughts. Number one, it sounds so trivial and simple, but I have to put the plug for masks in. And to Kevin's point, we have to do this right because I think a lot of times, there's this pressure to want to get back to normal very quickly. And I think it's important to just put out the reality that we're not going to be back to normal for a while, right? Whether that means a vaccine is available and widely available. But we do know that the best mitigation strategy to stop the spread is the use of masks. And so we have to get it right the first time, or we are going to see schools shut down again. We're going to see, once schools shut down again, that impact on businesses that have to now work with their employees on how to make it work. And so I think my call to businesses is to be creative. Be creative on how you're working with your employees, because again, this is about the long game. And I would hate to see decisions made in a short term because they feel good at the moment. But we know that this is going to definitely be a long game. And then the last point is about regionalization and regional kind of collaborations. I think one thing that we have seen positively from our new normal essentially is that we're seeing more regional solutions to combat this. And so I would encourage that work continue so we can get through this.
Great. Thank you, Chris. And thank you to all of our panelists for today. I especially want to thank Wayne and Strategic Spaces, K2, and Antonazi Associates for sponsoring this program. And I will just let everyone know we have our annual Public Policy Summit and Summer Connect coming up on September 1st. And we actually have all 6 of our regional university presidents who are going to serve on a panel to get us started with that at 3 o'clock on September 1st. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patty.
Stay well.
Thanks, everyone.